When Adventure Time introduces the character of Death, it immediately signals that the show's mythology stretches far beyond the everyday adventures of Finn and Jake. The land of Oo may often look whimsical, even silly, but its foundation rests on enormous questions about existence, and mortality sits right at the heart of those questions. Death is not presented as an abstract idea, but as a figure who lives, speaks, and judges. By personifying mortality, the show takes something that might normally be avoided in children's entertainment, and instead makes it a character we can meet face to face. What makes this decision so striking is how naturally it fits into the world of Adventure Time. Oo is already filled with cosmic beings, strange magic, and incomprehensible rules of reality, so the presence of Death feels almost inevitable. He is not a villain to be defeated, nor a mentor to be admired, but a constant, one of the few entities who stand outside the cycles of chaos and creation that define the series. While Prismo bends reality with wishes, while the cosmic owl slips into dreams, while Golb embodies the unravelling of meaning itself, Death simply enforces the ending of things. His neutrality sets him apart. He has no agenda, no desire to interfere in mortal lives unless they come to his domain, and no hunger for power. He is less like a schemer and more like the weight that keeps the universe balanced. This neutrality is enhanced by the way the show depicts him. Instead of towering terror or melodramatic doom, Death often appears calm, even casual. He can be humorous in his dry delivery. He can seem bureaucratic in the way he administers the afterlife. And he can even feel bored, as though his job has become routine after eons of enforcing the same rules. This detachment is powerful in its own way. To see Death without rage or cruelty is to see him as the embodiment of inevitability. He does not need to frighten others. His authority comes from the fact that no one, no matter how powerful, can escape his domain. At the same time, this understated personality adds a comedic flavour to his appearances, which is very much in line with Adventure Time's tone. The show is known for treating heavy themes with a kind of light-hearted weirdness, and Death is no exception. Instead of scaring viewers, his deadpan humour almost disarms the fear of mortality. He may sit in his throne room, passing judgment, but he does it with a shrug, as if reminding us that endings are not always dramatic, they are just part of existence. By making Death approachable in this way, the series invites its audience to think about mortality without overwhelming them. Still, the simplicity of his demeanour should not be mistaken for weakness. In fact, his calm nature is what makes him formidable. Oo is a land of constant instability. Wars erupt, magic surges, cosmic forces clash, and entire kingdoms rise and fall in the blink of an eye. In the middle of all this chaos, Death is the great stabilizer. No matter what happens, no matter how wild the mutations of magic or the corruption of ancient entities, every story eventually comes under his jurisdiction. He represents order in a universe where almost everything else is disorder. This role also makes him a mirror for the audience. Younger viewers may see him as just a funny, skeleton-like character who exists to give Finn and Jake strange quests. Older viewers, however, recognise that Death embodies the one truth no one can escape. He does not exist to frighten, but he does remind us that mortality is universal. Adventure Time handles this reminder with surprising grace, giving him a personality that is almost comforting in its bluntness. Death becomes a way for the show to acknowledge that even in a world of talking candy people and cosmic chaos, the reality of endings is never absent. From a narrative standpoint, Death provides something that Adventure Time consistently thrives on: the ability to merge the absurd with the profound. He can be the punchline of a joke and, in the very next moment, the anchor for an existential reflection. His neutrality allows him to serve as judge, mediator, and even comic relief, depending on what the story requires. He gives the writers a tool to explore what it means to confront the end, and in doing so, he expands the emotional range of the series. Without him, Adventure Time would have fewer ways to talk about mortality directly. In the end, Death's place in Oo's cosmology is not one of dominance, but of necessity. He is the one who ensures that, even in a world filled with chaos, cycles reach their natural close. Every beginning has an end, every life eventually meets him, and every story concludes under his watch. What makes him so fascinating is that he embodies this truth not with menace, but with composure. He reflects the inevitability of mortality with humour, detachment, and balance, reminding us that endings are not intrusions, but essential parts of the narrative. By personifying death, Adventure Time shows us that even the heaviest truths can be faced with curiosity, a little laughter, and a strange sense of peace. Death's presence in Adventure Time is introduced not with the bombast of a major villain, but with the quiet confidence of inevitability. He first comes into focus during Death in Bloom, the Season 2 episode that sets the tone for how the show will use him. In that story, Finn and Jake are tasked with taking care of Princess Bubblegum's plant, but their negligence leads it to wither and die. Their solution, in typical Adventure Time fashion, is not to confess or accept the mistake, but to dive headfirst into the impossible. They travel to the land of the dead, in hopes of bargaining with Death himself. This first appearance is crucial because it establishes both the character and the rules that surround him. Unlike many fantastical depictions of the afterlife, which lean into fire, torment, or judgment, the land of the dead in Adventure Time is unsettling in its plainness. It is eerie, yes, but also strangely mundane, a reflection of how the show often finds humour in stripping away melodrama. Death sits at the centre of this world, not as a monstrous overlord, but as a figure who seems simultaneously ordinary and cosmic. The fact that Finn and Jake, two living beings, can even stand in his presence immediately signals that this universe's boundaries between life and death are more permeable than one might expect. Death's design also communicates much of what the audience needs to know. He bears the skeletal imagery associated with the Grim Reaper, yet he does not loom menacingly over those who come before him. His mannerisms are subdued, his tone flat, and his attitude more bored than threatening. This first impression sets the template. In Ooh, Death is not here to scare the audience, but to embody the natural conclusion of every journey. His authority does not come from theatrics, but from certainty. The dynamic of this first encounter with Finn and Jake is equally important. They are not cowed into submission, nor do they collapse under the weight of existential fear. Instead, they argue with him, push back, and even attempt to cheat the rules of his domain by challenging him to a music battle. This is classic Adventure Time, taking the most serious subject imaginable and filtering it through humour, creativity, and absurdity. Yet beneath the joke lies something profound. In facing death, Finn and Jake are confronting the very limits of their agency. They can swing swords at monsters and topple kingdoms, but here they are forced to realise that some boundaries cannot be fought with brute force. And yet, because this is Adventure Time, the encounter does not end in despair. Their willingness to confront death on his own terms, even if those terms involve a ridiculous jam session, demonstrates the heart of the series' philosophy. Mortality can be faced, laughed at, and even bargained with, but it must still be respected. Death allows them to return with the flower restored, but only because he chooses to. The rules remain his, the power remains his, and the encounter serves as a reminder that Finn and Jake's victories, however grand, are not limitless. This early portrayal cements Death as more than a one-off gag character. He becomes a symbolic anchor, the kind of figure who, once seen, cannot be unseen. Even when he is not physically present in later episodes, his existence lingers in the background of the narrative. Characters can live wildly, chase immortality, or bend the rules of magic, but the audience knows now that somewhere in Ooh sits a figure who waits patiently for every ending. It is also worth noting how different this introduction feels compared to other animated series that tackle death. Many shows, particularly those aimed at younger audiences, shy away from making mortality a character. Adventure Time, however, embraces it, and does so early in its run. By placing death in front of Finn and Jake in Season 2, the series signals to viewers that the themes will grow with them. The children who laugh at a skeleton man playing bass will, in a few years, reflect on what it means that death could be bargained with, but never defeated. The seeds of deeper interpretation are planted in this very first encounter. Psychologically, this first appearance also serves as a rehearsal for viewers. In real life, death is abstract until it is personal. By giving it a face, a voice, and a personality, Adventure Time allows audiences to process mortality in a symbolic form. Finn and Jake's irreverent approach gives viewers permission not to recoil, but to lean into curiosity. If two adventurers can stand before death and treat him like another strange resident of Ooh, then perhaps we too can approach the concept without immediate dread. The establishment of Death's character in this episode also sets up his role in the wider cosmology of Ooh. He is not a chaotic force like the Lich, nor is he a wish-granter like Prismo. He is not even an ultimate destroyer like Golb. He is simply the one who ensures that the flow of life reaches its conclusion. This function makes him one of the most quietly powerful figures in the series. His neutrality makes him harder to classify, but it also ensures that he remains relevant across arcs, no matter how far the story drifts into cosmic territory. By the time Death in Bloom ends, the audience has been introduced to a character who is both humorous and unnerving, ordinary and essential. The contradictions in his portrayal are what make him memorable. He is the Reaper, yes, but he is also a weary bureaucrat. He is a cosmic entity, but also a source of jokes. He represents the inevitability that all things must end, yet he can be challenged to a bass guitar showdown. This blend of absurdity and profundity is the essence of Adventure Time, and Death embodies it from the moment he first appears. One of the most intriguing aspects of Death's story is his unusual connection to Peppermint Butler. Among all the characters in Adventure Time, Peppermint Butler is the one who most consistently seeks out forbidden knowledge, immersing himself in dark arts, summoning demons, and maintaining friendships that most of the Candy Kingdom would consider horrifying. While Princess Bubblegum leads through science and authority, Peppermint Butler studies the underworld and builds relationships with forces that exist far outside the Bubblegum walls. It is no surprise, then, that he knows Death personally, and it is through him that we gain a deeper sense of how Death operates. In the series, Peppermint Butler is often played for laughs, his sinister interests hidden behind a polite, squeaky voice. Yet when he interacts with Death, the tone shifts. Their exchanges are casual, almost friendly, which tells us something remarkable. Peppermint Butler does not treat Death as an enemy, and Death does not treat Peppermint Butler as a nuisance. Instead, Their relationship suggests mutual recognition. Death acknowledges Peppermint Butler as someone who understands the rules of his domain, while Peppermint Butler respects Death as a figure whose authority cannot be undermined. In a world where even cosmic entities like Prismo or the cosmic owl are approached with awe or confusion, Peppermint Butler's ease with Death feels both unsettling and revealing. This relationship deepens our understanding of Death's role in Ooh. If Peppermint Butler can treat him almost like an old acquaintance, then Death is not a chaotic disruptor, but a fixture in the order of things. He is someone you can appeal to, someone you can negotiate with, not because he is indulgent, but because he represents structure. Even the dark arts have rules, and Death is the one who enforces them. To a sorcerer like Peppermint Butler, that consistency is invaluable. It allows him to push boundaries while knowing exactly where the limits lie. The psychological angle of this relationship is fascinating as well. For Peppermint Butler, who is otherwise surrounded by candy citizens that shy away from darkness, Death represents a kind of validation. In a sense, Death is the ultimate friend for someone who thrives in the underworld. When we see Peppermint Butler interact with him, it feels less like a mortal cowering before a cosmic force, and more like a professional speaking to a superior. This casualness strips away some of the fear that usually surrounds the concept of death. For the audience, it shows that the one who governs mortality is not untouchable, but approachable if you know the right doors to knock on. This friendship also hints at Peppermint Butler's unique role in the series. He is often described as a servant, yet his knowledge and connections make him one of the most powerful figures in Oo's hidden world. His relationship with Death reinforces this. While Princess Bubblegum commands armies and invents new technologies, Peppermint Butler manages alliances with demons, spirits, and even Death himself. This duality emphasizes one of Adventure Time's recurring themes. Power is not always where it appears to be. The unassuming peppermint candy, dismissed by most, can walk into the domain of Death with ease. For Death, this connection reveals another side of his personality. He is not only a judge of mortals, but also a participant in Oo's complex network of relationships. By treating Peppermint Butler with familiarity, Death shows that he recognizes the persistence of certain mortals who refuse to live within simple boundaries. He does not destroy Peppermint Butler for dabbling in forbidden arts. Instead, he acknowledges him as if to say, "I see you working in the shadows, but you are still within my rules." This recognition underlines Death's impartiality. He does not pick sides between good and evil. He simply exists, enforcing endings when they arrive. In narrative terms, Peppermint Butler's bond with Death allows the writers to explore mortality in ways that would not fit Finn and Jake's worldview. Where Finn approaches Death with innocence and defiance, and Jake with humour and pragmatism, Peppermint Butler engages him as an equal in the realm of darkness. This gives the audience multiple perspectives on mortality: fear, curiosity, irreverence, and acceptance. Death's interactions with different characters enrich his role, showing that how one meets him depends as much on one's life choices as on the inevitability of his presence. Ultimately, the relationship between Death and Peppermint Butler demonstrates that even in the land of Ooh, where chaos reigns and rules are bent daily, there are still constants. Death is one of those constants. He can be bargained with, he can be spoken to, and he can even share a kind of friendship with a peppermint candy obsessed with darkness. But his authority never falters. Every interaction between him and Peppermint Butler reminds us that knowledge of the underworld does not free anyone from mortality. It only makes the dance around it more interesting. Death's presence in Adventure Time would not carry the same weight if he only interacted with secondary characters or lurked in the background. His true significance emerges when he becomes part of Finn and Jake's journey, because through them the audience learns how heroes confront the one opponent they cannot defeat. These encounters shape not only the boys' adventures, but also the tone of the show itself, demonstrating how mortality becomes a recurring theme in their story. The earliest and most memorable encounter, of course, takes place in Death in Bloom. For Finn and Jake, this meeting is not about themselves, but about repairing a mistake they made with Princess Bubblegum's beloved plant. Their motivation is almost comically small compared to the enormity of the place they are entering. Yet, this is precisely what makes the episode so effective. The audience watches these two reckless heroes stumble into the land of the dead with the same confidence they bring to fighting a monster or exploring a dungeon. They treat death like another obstacle to overcome, another character to bargain with. Their willingness to stand in front of him reflects both their courage and their innocence. They have not yet learned that some rules are beyond their control. The music battle that ensues is a perfect encapsulation of Adventure Time's spirit. Where most stories might present a tense philosophical debate or a grim battle for survival, Finn and Jake face death through a contest of sound, absurd yet oddly fitting. What emerges is a balance between comedy and seriousness. Yes, it is silly to challenge death with a bass guitar, but it also communicates something profound. Death does not need to roar or swing a scythe to establish authority. Even in defeat, he allows Finn and Jake to leave only because he chooses to. The scene teaches the boys, and by extension the audience, to mortality can be resisted, mocked, or negotiated with, but it cannot be eliminated. Later encounters build on this first impression, adding layers to Finn and Jake's understanding of what death represents. One of the key developments is the revelation that Jake, despite his magical powers, is not immune to mortality. While Jake is often portrayed as carefree, his interactions with death highlight a quieter side of his character. When he faces mortality, he does not panic or despair. Instead, he reacts with the same laid-back pragmatism that defines his entire outlook on life. To Jake, death is not a terrifying force, but a reminder that every adventure has an ending, and that endings are part of the fun. This attitude provides a counterweight to Finn's youthful defiance. For Finn, encounters with death resonate differently. Finn is a character obsessed with heroism, justice, and making the right choices. Mortality challenges these ideals by placing limits on what even the greatest hero can achieve. Standing before death forces Finn to accept that courage cannot stop every outcome. Psychologically, this confrontation mirrors the journey from childhood into adulthood, and the moment when one realizes that effort and optimism do not guarantee control over the universe. Death's calm detachment contrasts with Finn's fiery idealism, teaching him lessons that no monster battle could convey. These meetings also allow the audience to explore mortality through multiple emotional lenses. With Finn, we see resistance and frustration, the refusal to accept limitation. With Jake, we see humour and acceptance, a willingness to roll with whatever comes. By presenting these differing reactions side by side, Adventure Time reflects the variety of ways people cope with the idea of death in real life. The show does not privilege one reaction over the other. Instead, it presents both as valid, reminding viewers that each person's encounter with mortality is deeply personal. Beyond personal growth, Finn and Jake's encounters with death also reveal something about the structure of Death is not just a figure who presides over an abstract afterlife, but someone who interacts directly with mortals. His willingness to engage in contests, to speak, and even to show humour indicates that mortality in U is not a silent void. Instead, it is a place with rules, authority, and personality. This makes the idea of death less alienating. The land of the dead is not depicted as a terrifying abyss, but as another strange dimension populated by a figure who, while powerful, still abides by his own sense of fairness. Narratively, these encounters serve another function. They remind the audience of stakes. Adventure Time often indulges in whimsy and absurdity, but the presence of death grounds the series. No matter how wild the adventures become, the shadow of mortality lingers. Finn and Jake can push back against death, laugh at him, and even strike temporary bargains, but the audience knows that he will always be waiting. This knowledge adds tension and depth to the story, elevating it beyond endless escapades. In the broader arc of the series, Death's interactions with Finn and Jake become symbolic markers of their growth. Early on, they treat him as another quest. Later, their encounters reveal deeper reflections about identity, family, and destiny. Each meeting underscores how far they have come, moving from innocent adventurers to figures who can grapple with the heaviest truths of existence. Death does not change across these encounters. His neutrality is unwavering, but Finn and Jake do. Their evolving reactions to him mirror their journey into maturity. Ultimately, Death's importance to Finn and Jake lies not in any single episode, but in the consistency of his presence. He is always there in the background, a reminder that even heroes are not exempt from endings. Their encounters with him reveal their character, challenge their assumptions, and guide their growth. For Finn, he is the teacher of limits. For Jake, he is the reminder to embrace the ride. For the audience, he is both the punchline and the warning, the skeleton with a bass guitar who nevertheless holds the final word over every story. To understand Death's true position in Adventure Time, it is not enough to look only at his interactions with Finn, Jake, or Peppermint Butler. His authority is also shaped by the setting in which he presides, the strange and unsettling realm of the underworld. The land of the dead is one of those locations in U that is shown only in fragments, but each glimpse reveals layers of meaning. It is not designed as a horrifying pit of suffering, nor is it a paradise of eternal rest. Instead, it feels like an eerie courtroom, a bureaucratic dimension where the weight of endings is handled with the same seriousness as a clerk stamping papers. This is where Death holds his court, and its tone is as important as his character. When Finn and Jake enter this realm in Death in Bloom, the first impression is one of strangeness rather than terror. The place feels alien, stripped of colour, and filled with a quiet stillness that stands in contrast to the chaos of U's surface. This quiet is not peaceful, but neither is it agonizing. It reflects the neutrality of Death himself. The underworld is not there to punish or reward, but simply to collect. This simple yet unnerving setting strips mortality of the fire and brimstone imagery common in other stories, replacing it with a stark reminder: death is not a spectacle, but an inevitability. What makes this space so effective is how it mirrors the psychology of endings. Many people imagine the afterlife as something grand, a continuation of drama or meaning. Adventure Time rejects that expectation. In its vision, the underworld is quiet, subdued, almost boring. Death does not need grandeur because his power is inescapable. By showing us a realm that feels more like a cosmic waiting room than a battlefield, the series captures the unsettling mundanity of finality. The underworld is not about spectacle, it is about certainty. The courtroom-like quality of the place reinforces Death's role as arbiter. Just as judges preside over cases with impartiality, Death presides over the conclusion of lives without favoritism. The throne he sits upon, the way visitors must stand before him, and the strange aura of formality all contribute to this impression. For Finn and Jake, who are used to solving problems with action, standing in this space forces them into submission. There is no monster to fight, no treasure to steal, no spell to cast. There is only a figure who decides, and a realm that underscores the inevitability of his decision. The design of the underworld also carries symbolic weight. Adventure Time has always thrived on visual metaphor, and the land of the dead is no exception. Its emptiness reflects the stripping away of identity at the end of life, where Oo is bursting with colour, odd shapes, and infinite variety. The underworld is uniform. This contrast tells the audience that life is defined by difference, but death is defined by sameness. No matter what you were in life, a candy person, a vampire, a hero, or a monster, the underworld equalizes all. This is not presented with cruelty, but with inevitability. The fact that Finn and Jake can navigate this space, and even challenge death within it, shows the permeability of Oo's boundaries. Yet it also highlights the risk of entering realms beyond mortal comprehension. By stepping into the underworld, the boys symbolically step into adulthood's realization that endings are real, and that the systems governing them are beyond personal control. Their playful challenge with music feels out of place against the backdrop of this solemn realm, and that dissonance is the point. They can laugh, they can resist, but the setting itself insists that there is a weight here greater than their antics. Psychologically, the underworld functions as a container for anxiety about mortality. It gives form to fears that are otherwise unnameable. By depicting it as a strange yet structured space, Adventure Time allows its audience to project their curiosity and dread into a world that feels both distant and familiar. Children may see it as another weird location in Oo, but older viewers can recognize its deeper symbolism. The underworld represents the human desire to give death a shape, to imagine a place where endings are processed and accounted for. This realm also extends death's neutrality into the environment itself. Just as he is not malicious or kind, the underworld is not terrifying or comforting. It simply exists as part of the fabric of Oo. In doing so, it expands the cosmology of the series, placing mortality on the same level as dreams, magic, and cosmic chaos. Oo is not just a world of adventure, it is a world where the metaphysical is real, where the end of life has a throne and a domain. The Court of the Underworld ultimately reminds us that Adventure Time does not treat death as a disruption of story, but as part of its design. The episodes that feature this realm do not bring the series to a halt. Instead, they expand it, showing that even in a world of candy citizens and magical comets, the rules of mortality still apply. Death presides over this space as calmly as he does over his role in the cosmos, reinforcing that his presence is not an interruption of Oo's story, but one of its foundations. When we see Death seated in his underworld throne, it is clear that he is not just a character, but also an institution. He does not chase down mortals or terrorize kingdoms like the Lich, nor does he spread chaos and destruction like Golb. Instead, Death's strength comes from authority, the kind of authority that does not need to announce itself. His very presence establishes the rules, and his demeanor communicates that the rules are not negotiable. In Oo, where even cosmic laws can bend and twist. Death stands as the ultimate arbiter. The way he judges is not rooted in morality as mortals understand it. Death is not interested in good or evil, nor in punishing or rewarding. His judgments are absolute, not because he wishes them to be so, but because they are woven into the structure of existence. In psychological terms, he represents the superego stripped of culture and morality, the pure enforcement of law without preference. This impartiality makes him both terrifying and oddly comforting. Terrifying because no plea can truly sway him beyond what is possible. Comforting because his decisions are consistent. Unlike the chaos of Oo's surface, where allegiances shift and morality blurs, death always responds the same way, with certainty. The encounter in Death in Bloom demonstrates this perfectly. Finn and Jake enter his realm not out of destiny, but because of a dead flower, a mistake born of carelessness. From one perspective, this should be an unworthy cause to disturb the arbiter of all endings. Yet death still hears their case. He listens, not with compassion, but with procedure. Their challenge, a music battle, is absurd on the surface, but it is also symbolic of how Adventure Time handles justice, not as a rigid courtroom, but as a strange mixture of fairness and unpredictability. Death could have dismissed them instantly, but he allows the contest, which is in itself a judgment. He does not humiliate them, nor does he destroy them. Instead, he lets the rules of the game dictate the outcome, reinforcing that fairness in Oo is not about kindness, but about structure. This role, as judge, extends beyond Finn and Jake. When Peppermint Butler interacts with death, it is not as a frightened subject, but as someone who understands the laws of the underworld. Their exchanges are casual because Peppermint Butler respects that death does not bend his rules out of favoritism. For someone dabbling in forbidden magic, the greatest reassurance is knowing that the cosmic judge is impartial. In a sense, Peppermint Butler's reliance on death highlights just how critical this neutrality is. Without it, dark magic would descend into pure chaos. With death enforcing limits, even the most sinister practices remain within a framework. Death's impartiality also highlights his contrast with other cosmic forces. Prismo, for example, grants wishes but requires balance to maintain the timeline. The cosmic owl appears in dreams but influences fate through prophecy. Golb represents entropy, the collapse of structure into meaninglessness. Death, however, stands apart from all of them. He does not tempt mortals with possibilities, nor does he corrupt or destroy. He simply ensures the inevitable. This makes him one of the most stable elements in Oo's entire cosmology. If Prismo is possibility and Golb is annihilation, death is conclusion. On a deeper level, this impartiality reflects how human beings often conceptualize mortality. Death is not a punishment for mistakes or a reward for virtue. It comes for everyone equally. By depicting him as a judge who does not care for good or evil, Adventure Time mirrors the universal reality that mortality cannot be negotiated with. The flower in Death in Bloom is restored only because death allows it, but his choice does not overturn the truth that all things end. He bends slightly to humour Finn and Jake's challenge, but the weight of his judgment still hangs over the moment. There is also a psychological power in death's calm demeanour as judge, where mortals often approach death with fear, bargaining, or denial. Death himself shows no anxiety. His lack of urgency contrasts with the desperation of those who appear before him. This juxtaposition emphasizes the gap between human perception and cosmic reality. To the living, death is the end of everything. To death, it is simply the order of things. Watching him deliver judgments with such disinterest forces characters and viewers alike to confront how small their struggles appear in the grand scheme of time. Narratively, making death a judge rather than a tyrant keeps the story balanced. If he were cruel, he would become just another villain for Finn and Jake to defeat. If he were benevolent, he would be reduced to a wise helper. By making him impartial, the show preserves his mystique and ensures that his authority is never compromised. He is not meant to be defeated or adored. He is meant to be recognized as the final word. Every time death presides over a decision, Adventure Time emphasizes that endings are not negotiable, but they can still carry meaning. A flower may be restored, a deal may be struck, but none of these moments erase the greater truth. The arbiter may show humor, he may allow games, he may even treat mortals with a casual shrug, but behind all of it lies the unshakable reality that he governs the line that no one can cross forever. In this way, death functions as one of the most important anchors in U. His role as judge and arbiter ensures that no matter how wild the stories become, there is always something unshakable at the center. Finn and Jake can stumble through the strangest quests imaginable. Peppermint Butler can flirt with forbidden powers. Kingdoms can rise and fall, but in the end, all paths lead back to Death's court. And there, under his neutral gaze, every story finds its ending. If Death in Adventure Time were simply a skeleton with a scythe, his role would be clear but shallow. What makes him so memorable, however, is the way the show imbues him with personality. He is not a silent force or a faceless spectre. Instead, he is expressive, humorous, detached, and even a little weary. These traits transform him from a one-note embodiment of mortality into a fully realized character who both fascinates and unsettles. The first thing that strikes viewers about Death is his calm. In a show filled with loud personalities, rapid-fire dialogue, and constant energy, Death speaks slowly, evenly, and with little emotion. His tone borders on monotone, as though he has seen every possible story play out and no longer finds much to be surprised about. This stillness is unnerving precisely because it contrasts so sharply with the vibrancy of U. The Candy Kingdom bursts with chatter, Jake stretches and quips, Finn shouts in excitement, but Death sits quietly, speaking as though nothing is urgent. This detachment is not apathy, it is authority. He does not need to exert energy because his position is unassailable. Yet within this calm demeanour, there is also a surprising humour. Death often comes across as dryly sarcastic, with a sense of timing that turns otherwise terrifying moments into jokes. When he accepts a music battle against Finn and Jake, the absurdity of the scene becomes part of his charm. He does not resist the challenge with anger, but embraces it with a kind of tired amusement, as if humouring children. This use of humour reflects one of Adventure Time's central philosophies, that even the heaviest truths can be approached with playfulness. By giving Death a comedic edge, the show makes him approachable without diminishing his power. Another defining element of his personality is his fairness. Death never cheats, never lashes out, and never bends the rules for personal gain. He listens, he considers, and he delivers outcomes that reflect balance. This fairness is unusual for a figure associated with mortality, since most depictions of death in myth and fiction lean into cruelty, trickery, or cold inevitability. In Adventure Time, however, Death feels strangely trustworthy. He may not be warm or compassionate, but he is honest. When he accepts a deal, he abides by it. When he delivers a judgment, he does not go back on his word. This consistency makes him a paradox. He is both terrifying and reliable. Psychologically, this consistency gives death a different symbolic weight than many of his cosmic counterparts. Figures like the Lich thrive on chaos, while characters like Golb represent complete dissolution. Death, by contrast, provides stability. His personality conveys the idea that mortality is not about surprise or betrayal, but about the one rule that never changes. The calmness, humour, and fairness he shows are all expressions of that certainty. By treating him this way, the show shifts mortality from something to fear into something to acknowledge. There is also a sense of weariness in his character. Death speaks and acts like someone who has been doing the same job for eternity. He is never frantic, never desperate, but his casualness hints at boredom. This trait humanizes him. Instead of an aloof god, he feels like an employee bound to a role that cannot be refused. Viewers sense that his detachment is not just authority, but fatigue. In this way, Death becomes almost sympathetic. He does not delight in endings, nor does he seek them out. He simply enforces them endlessly, because that is his place in the universe. This weariness also connects him to Peppermint Butler, Finn, and Jake in unexpected ways. When Peppermint Butler treats him with familiarity, it is not just because he respects Death's authority, it is because he recognizes the loneliness of the role. When Finn and Jake challenge him, Death responds not with cruelty, but with mild tolerance, almost as if welcoming the novelty of something different. His willingness to entertain a ridiculous base battle suggests that he, too, finds relief in diversion. Mortality is heavy, but even Death himself seems to appreciate a break from monotony. From a thematic perspective, Death's personality is what allows him to resonate across episodes, despite his limited appearances. If he were only stern and frightening, he would fade quickly into cliché. If he were too light-hearted, he would undermine the gravity of his role. By balancing calm authority with humour and weariness, Adventure Time gives him a unique identity. He is recognisable the moment he appears, not because of his design alone, but because of the voice and mannerisms that communicate so much about who he is. For the audience, this personality serves an important function. Death's fairness and humour make the concept of mortality less alien. Instead of representing absolute terror, he becomes someone we can imagine speaking to, someone who might listen, someone who might even laugh. This softening does not erase his authority, but reframes it. Viewers are encouraged to think about mortality not as a monstrous force waiting to strike, but as a figure who is both strange and understandable. In the end, Death's personality is what makes him endure in the minds of Adventure Time fans. He is not just a skeleton with power. He is calm in the face of desperation, humorous in the face of fear, fair in the face of chaos, and weary in the face of eternity. These contradictions make him compelling. They also reinforce the show's larger message, that even the most daunting truths of existence can be faced with a mixture of seriousness, humour, and acceptance. Death embodies that message in every word he speaks and every judgment he delivers. Although Death does not appear in every storyline, his influence stretches far beyond his direct encounters with Finn and Jake. One of the clearest examples of this comes in the Stakes miniseries, where Marceline confronts her past, her immortality, and the consequences of her choices. Death himself does not dominate the screen in this arc, but his shadow hangs over the entire narrative, because Stakes is, at its core, a meditation on what it means to live forever, and what it means to escape the inevitability of mortality. Marceline's struggle in Stakes is not just about defeating resurrected vampires, but about her relationship to death itself. As a vampire, she has been granted a kind of immortality, a life stretched beyond its natural boundaries. At first glance, this might seem like a gift, but the miniseries makes clear that it is a burden. Her desire to be cured of vampirism is really a desire to return to the cycle of life and death, to be allowed the same ending that everyone else must face. In a world where death is an actual figure with a throne and a court, Marceline's choice gains even more symbolic weight. She is not just tired of living, she is yearning for the justice that death provides, an ending that feels fair. This longing reflects one of Adventure Time's recurring themes. Immortality without death is not freedom but imprisonment. Death's authority, as seen in earlier episodes, is impartial and consistent. But characters like Marceline remind us of what happens when that authority is sidestepped. Vampirism, with its unnatural extension of life, creates imbalance. It locks a person outside the cycle that death oversees, trapping them in a version of existence that feels incomplete. By choosing to seek mortality again, Marceline is not rejecting life, but embracing the wholeness of it, beginnings and endings together. The Stakes arc also highlights how death's neutrality intersects with concepts of power. The vampire court seeks dominance, control, and permanence, but death, by his very nature, undercuts all of those ambitions. Every ruler eventually falls, every immortal eventually reaches him, and every attempt to cheat mortality eventually collapses. Marceline's confrontation with her vampire enemies is therefore not only a battle against her past, but also a struggle against a worldview that denies death's authority. Their refusal to accept endings represents the kind of imbalance that the underworld exists to correct. Psychologically, this makes Death's presence in Stakes almost haunting. Even though he does not stride across the screen in every scene, his role is implicit in every decision Marceline makes. Her depression, her sense of being trapped, her ambivalence about immortality, all of these emotions circle around the absence of death. Without the possibility of an ending, life loses its shape. Adventure Time portrays this not as a purely tragic fact, but as a profound truth. It is the limits of life that give it meaning. Death embodies those limits, and so even in his absence, his influence frames the story. The arc also reinforces one of the more subtle points about Death's character, that he is not cruel. If Death were depicted as malicious, Marceline's quest to return to mortality would read as self-destruction, as though she longed to surrender to an enemy. But because Death is neutral and consistent, her yearning for mortality comes across as a search for fairness. She is not running toward annihilation, but toward balance. Her journey suggests that death, in this world, is not something to be feared above all else, but something to be accepted as a rightful conclusion. For Finn and Jake, who assist Marceline in this arc, the lessons of Stakes also deepen their understanding of mortality. Finn has always been resistant to limits, pushing against them with heroism, while Jake has been more laid back in his acceptance. Watching Marceline wrestle with her own immortality places those philosophies in a larger context. They see firsthand that death is not just the end of adventures, but the framework that allows a life to feel whole. Marceline's struggle becomes their lesson as well, reinforcing the truths they had already glimpsed in their encounters with death himself. From a narrative perspective, Stakes is one of the clearest demonstrations of how Adventure Time uses its characters to explore profound themes through fantastical stories. Death does not need to appear constantly to remain present. His authority is so deeply embedded in the structure of Oo that even when he is not on screen, he shapes the choices of those who live forever or seek to escape him. In Marceline's journey, we see the cost of immortality, the longing for closure, and the truth that life without death is a distortion. All of these ideas connect back to death, the figure who ensures that endings are not just possible but necessary. In the end, Stakes shows us that death is more than a character in Adventure Time. He is a principle that defines the universe. Marceline's struggle, the vampire court's defiance, and Finn and Jake's loyalty all orbit around the reality that endings cannot be erased without consequence. By linking this arc to death's unseen presence, the series deepens its exploration of what mortality means in Ooh and what it means for us as viewers. One of the most fascinating aspects of Adventure Time's mythology is how it pairs death with his counterpart, life. Their dual existence adds a new layer of meaning to both characters and, by extension, to the world of Ooh itself. Where death embodies endings, life represents beginnings, growth, and renewal. By placing them side by side, the show turns mortality from a one-dimensional concept into a cycle, suggesting that the universe is not simply about things ending, but also about things continually beginning. When life is introduced, the contrast is immediate. He is colourful, eccentric, and vibrant, exuding a chaotic joy that makes him feel almost overwhelming. His energy fills the screen in the same way that death's calmness empties it. Life radiates possibility, while death radiates finality, yet the two are not enemies. Their relationship is more like opposite ends of the same spectrum, each necessary for the other to exist. Without life, death would have no role. Without death, life would have no meaning. The symmetry of their existence communicates one of Adventure Time's clearest philosophical lessons. Creation and destruction, beginnings and endings, are inseparable. What makes this comparison so striking is how differently the two characters express their cosmic authority. Life is flamboyant, unrestrained, and unpredictable, while death is measured, impartial, and consistent. Life feels like the embodiment of chaos within order, growth that cannot be contained, existence bubbling over into absurd shapes. Death, by contrast, is order within chaos, the reminder that no matter how wild things grow, they will one day reach a conclusion. This difference is not just aesthetic, it is psychological. Life embodies desire, exuberance, and appetite. Death embodies detachment, fairness, and inevitability. Together, they form a balance that reflects the complexity of Ooh itself. The interactions between life and death, brief though they are, reveal how Adventure Time views cosmic opposites. They are not locked in eternal combat, as one might expect from a traditional good versus evil dynamic. Instead, they treat one another with a kind of mutual recognition. Their coexistence suggests that the universe of Ooh is not structured around conflict, but around balance. Where the Lich seeks to annihilate meaning, and Golb threatens to dissolve everything into nothingness, death and life simply continue their roles, each complementing the other without struggle. This neutrality reinforces the idea that mortality is not a flaw in the system, but part of its design. Psychologically, the pairing of life and death speaks to the human need to find meaning in opposites. People often understand the world in dualities, light and dark, joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings. Adventure Time taps into this instinct, giving form to both sides of the cycle. By doing so, it allows viewers to see mortality not as a lonely concept, but as one half of a natural rhythm. Death may be unsettling, but he is softened by the existence of life. Similarly, life's chaos becomes more meaningful when framed by death's inevitability. The two define each other in ways that elevate them beyond mere characters into symbols of universal truth. Thematically, this duality expands Adventure Time's scope. The show is not only about adventures and friendships, but also about the underlying mechanics of existence. By giving both death and life distinct personalities, the writers make abstract concepts tangible. This allows the series to explore deep philosophical questions without losing its sense of whimsy. When Finn, Jake, or Peppermint Butler interact with death, the audience is reminded of limits. When they encounter life, the audience is reminded of abundance. Together, these encounters encourage reflection on how beginnings and endings shape the meaning of every story. Narratively, the comparison between life and death also demonstrates why death feels so necessary in Ooh. Without him, life would spiral unchecked into chaos, producing a world without boundaries. Without life, death's impartiality would reduce existence to nothingness, devoid of renewal or joy. Their balance ensures that Ooh can contain both silliness and seriousness, both growth and decay. It is this balance that makes the show feel complete, because it mirrors the way people experience reality. We live in the tension between beginnings and endings, and Adventure Time personifies that truth in these two characters. Ultimately, the comparison between death and life highlights the show's belief that mortality is not something to fear, but something to accept as part of a larger whole. Death's neutrality and fairness gain greater clarity when seen alongside life's vibrancy and chaos. Their relationship teaches that endings are not the enemy of beginnings, but their partner, and that the cycle of creation and conclusion is what gives the world shape. By presenting them in this way, Adventure Time gives viewers a lens through which to see not just Ooh, but their own lives, as part of an unbroken rhythm of living and dying, growing and ending, beginning and returning. The presence of death in Adventure Time would mean little if the series did not also confront the ways mortality plays out across the land of Ooh. His appearances remind us that death is inevitable, but the show's broader narrative demonstrates how different beings experience that inevitability. Unlike many fantasy worlds, where mortality is either ignored or explained away by magic, Adventure Time keeps it central, allowing the idea of endings to shape characters, kingdoms, and even cosmic forces. To understand death's role fully, we have to look at how Ooh itself treats mortality. From the very beginning, Adventure Time is a world where characters die, but often in unexpected or strangely casual ways. Villains dissolve into nothingness, background characters vanish in battles, and magical beings are sometimes destroyed in an instant. The deaths are not always emphasized, but their frequency builds an atmosphere where endings are real, even if they are sometimes treated with humor. In this sense, Ooh is not sanitized. It accepts mortality as part of the landscape, whether through tragedy or comedy. At the same time, certain characters resist mortality altogether. Marceline, as explored in the Stakes arc, becomes a case study of how immortality distorts the natural cycle. Her struggle shows that life without the possibility of death feels incomplete, an echo of existence rather than its full form. Peppermint Butler's fascination with dark arts also reflects this tension. His comfort in dealing with death directly is not just about curiosity. It reveals a deep desire to work within the rules of mortality while still testing their boundaries. By building relationships with forces like death, he ensures that his dabbling never strays too far outside the lines. Then there are those who defy mortality in different ways, like the Lich. His goal is not to live forever in the traditional sense, but to eradicate life itself, an ambition that seeks to break the cycle entirely. In contrast to Death, who enforces balance, the Lich represents the horror of endings without renewal, a void that seeks to undo the meaning of both life and death. The tension between these two forces underscores just how critical Death's neutrality is. Without him, would be vulnerable to entities that want to tip the scales into imbalance. Finn and Jake's adventures repeatedly place them in contact with mortality, not only in their encounters with Death himself, but also through the losses they experience along the way. Finn grapples with the fleeting nature of relationships, failed romances, friendships that change, the reality of growing older. Jake eventually faces mortality in the most direct sense in the series finale, when his own death becomes central to Together Again. Even before that, his carefree attitude toward risk-taking shows an acceptance of mortality that contrasts with Finn's resistance. These personal arcs give the audience multiple windows into what mortality feels like in Sometimes it is feared, sometimes it is laughed at, and sometimes it is embraced. The show also explores mortality through kingdoms and societies. The Candy Kingdom, for example, lives under the illusion of Princess Bubblegum's scientific control, but even there, citizens can die. The Fire Kingdom burns with destructive power, where lives can be snuffed out quickly. Each kingdom reflects a different relationship to mortality, shaped by its ruler and culture. Yet no matter how much they resist, every society is ultimately subject to Death's authority. His court may not appear in every story, but its shadow lies across every kingdom. Psychologically, this broad treatment of mortality reflects how people cope with death in real life. Some approach it with humour, making jokes to soften the fear. Others resist it fiercely, seeking to extend life through science, magic, or denial. Still others accept it, finding peace in the idea that all things must end. Adventure Time captures this spectrum by showing a wide range of responses, allowing viewers to see themselves reflected in characters' attitudes. From a thematic standpoint, mortality is what gives Adventure Time its poignancy. The show may be full of silly adventures and surreal humour, but its emotional weight comes from the recognition that time passes, people change, and nothing lasts forever. This truth is what makes episodes about loss, like those centred on Marceline's past or Simon's tragic transformation, resonate so deeply. Behind every joke lies the reminder that the story, like life itself, is fleeting. And this is where Death's character gains even more importance. He is not just a skeleton with authority, he is the embodiment of the rules that make every story meaningful. Without him, endings would have no anchor. With him, becomes a place where even the strangest, most whimsical adventures feel connected to something universal. By enforcing mortality, Death ensures that every moment of life in whether lived by a hero, a villain, or a background candy citizen, matters precisely because it will not last forever. Adventure Time is a series where design choices are rarely arbitrary. The look of every character, from the simplest candy citizen to the most cosmic entity, communicates something about who they are and what they represent. Death is no exception. His skeletal form, his scythe, his throne in the underworld, each element of his design carries symbolic weight, shaping how the audience perceives him and reinforcing his role in Oo's cosmology. At first glance, Death's design fits comfortably within the archetype of the Grim Reaper. He has the bony face, the hollow eyes, the aura of finality that one would expect. Yet, as with most of Adventure Time, the familiar is always twisted slightly into something strange. He does not tower over others as a frightening giant. He does not stalk his victims with menace. Instead, he sits, he listens, and he speaks with a weary calm. The design captures the essence of the archetype without indulging in cliché. In stripping away theatrics, the show makes him more unsettling. He is death as a fact, not as a horror story. The skeletal appearance is, of course, the most direct symbol. Bones are what remain when life has ended, the most universal marker of mortality across cultures. By embodying this imagery, death visually communicates inevitability. But the way Adventure Time animates him, with simplicity, almost casual lines, softens the terror usually associated with skeletons. He is not grotesque, but familiar. This makes his design approachable, which fits perfectly with his personality, detached, neutral, and strangely humorous. His scythe is another important feature, drawing directly from centuries of symbolism. Traditionally, the scythe represents the harvest, cutting down life when it has reached maturity. Farmers use it to gather crops, and by extension, the Grim Reaper uses it to gather souls. In Adventure Time, the scythe is present but not exaggerated. It is less a weapon and more a tool, reflecting Death's role not as a destroyer but as a collector. This subtle detail emphasizes that his job is about process, not violence. He does not kill in anger, he harvests because it is time. The throne upon which death sits also conveys meaning. Thrones are symbols of authority, but in his case, the throne is not gilded or adorned with riches. It is stark, cold, and unembellished, a visual echo of the underworld itself. This absence of ornament reinforces his neutrality. He is not a ruler who seeks glory or admiration. He sits because his role demands it, because every cycle of life must eventually pass through his court. The throne is not a prize, but a burden, a seat he must occupy endlessly. Even the environment around him, the muted tones, the empty spaces, contributes to his design. Where other realms in Adventure Time burst with colour and chaos, Death's domain feels drained. The lack of vibrancy is itself symbolic. In Death, individuality fades and everything is levelled. The barren aesthetic strips away distractions, forcing focus on the figure at the centre. In a series defined by visual playfulness, the restraint of this design speaks volumes. Psychologically, these choices affect how the audience responds to him. The skeletal face reminds viewers of their own mortality, but the calm design prevents panic. The scythe signals the inevitability of endings, but the absence of menace reframes that inevitability as natural. The throne communicates authority, but its plainness discourages reverence. Together, these elements craft a character who is both archetypal and original, instantly recognizable as Death, yet uniquely Adventure Time's version of him. The symbolism also ties back to the show's broader themes. Adventure Time consistently emphasizes that endings are part of cycles, not interruptions of them. By designing death as both familiar and understated, the creators communicate that mortality is not to be feared as an enemy, but acknowledged as a truth. His design reassures even as it unsettles, inviting viewers to reflect rather than recoil. For the characters who meet him, this symbolism is just as important. Finn, Jake, and Peppermint Butler stand before a figure whose appearance tells them immediately what he represents. They do not need explanations. The skeletal face, the scythe, the throne, they know they are in the presence of the final authority. And yet, because his design lacks cruelty, they are able to speak, bargain, and even joke with him. This balance is the genius of his design. He communicates inevitability without shutting out possibility. Ultimately, Death's design is not just an aesthetic choice, but a narrative tool. It blends archetypal imagery with Adventure Time's unique tone, making him both timeless and specific to Ooh. The skeleton, the scythe, the throne, and the drained palette all combine to remind us that mortality is inescapable. But by presenting these elements with restraint, the show transforms terror into acceptance. Death looks like death should, but softened, humanized, and made approachable enough to fit into a world of candy people, magical dogs, and cosmic chaos. In the land of Ooh, power is always in flux. Princess Bubblegum rules the Candy Kingdom with a mix of science and authority. Marceline commands respect through her centuries of experience, and cosmic beings like Prismo or Golb wield influence that shapes reality itself. Yet standing apart from all these shifting hierarchies is Death, whose power is absolute, not because it can be flaunted, but because it does not need to be. His role in Ooh's power dynamics is subtle but profound. He is the one force that no kingdom, no hero, and no magic user can override. To understand how Death fits into these dynamics, it helps to consider how other characters relate to him. Princess Bubblegum, for all her brilliance, cannot escape the limits of mortality. She has stretched her life through scientific experiments, she has rebuilt her body from candy biomass, and she has wielded authority that spans centuries. Yet even she would ultimately fall under Death's jurisdiction. Her power is political and scientific, but it is temporary. The presence of Death serves as a quiet reminder that her reign, no matter how extended, is not eternal. For sorcerers like Peppermint Butler, Death represents both a boundary and an ally. Peppermint Butler's dabbling in necromancy and forbidden spells could easily destabilize Ooh if left unchecked. Yet his casual relationship with Death shows that he recognizes the need for limits. Dark magic may grant power, but only within the framework that Death enforces. This mutual recognition reflects an unspoken contract. Peppermint Butler can bend the rules, but he cannot break them. Death's presence ensures that even the most ambitious magic user is still operating within cosmic boundaries. In contrast, villains like the Lich reveal what happens when the authority of Death is rejected. The Lich seeks not balance, but absolute annihilation, the erasure of life and death alike. His ambition is a direct challenge to Death's order, not because he wishes to live forever, but because he wishes to erase the entire cycle. In this sense, the Lich represents a more terrifying threat than immortality itself, because he would strip Death of his function entirely. The fact that Death still exists, despite the Lich's efforts, underscores his resilience. No matter how destructive the forces of Ooh become, Death remains, watching and waiting. Jake's eventual fate in Together Again adds another layer to this power dynamic. Jake has always embodied a relaxed attitude toward life's struggles, often shrugging off problems that overwhelm others. When his death finally comes, he does not fight against it. Instead, he accepts it, even embraces it, showing that Death's authority can also be met with peace. This acceptance is not weakness, but recognition of a power greater than any hero or kingdom. In Jake's calm submission, we see the ultimate acknowledgement of Death's place in Ooh's hierarchy. Even cosmic entities are shaped by Death's presence. Prismo grants wishes, but wishes themselves carry limits. The cosmic owl delivers prophecies, but prophecies are only meaningful because they point to outcomes that end. Even Golb, the chaotic devourer, thrives on destruction, but his destruction is made meaningful only by contrast with the order Death maintains. Without endings, the very idea of prophecy or annihilation would lose coherence. Death's quiet rule thus extends even over those who seem far more flamboyant or chaotic. He does not wrestle with them directly, but his power permeates the structure of the universe. What makes Death's place in U's power dynamics so unusual is that he does not seek influence. He does not command armies, build kingdoms, or grant favors. His authority comes from inevitability, which cannot be bargained away or overthrown. In this sense, Death represents the ultimate limit of ambition. No matter how far a ruler extends their reach, no matter how powerful a wizard becomes, no matter how destructive a villain grows, all are subject to the same finality. Death's silence on the political stage is not absence, but supremacy. Psychologically, this balance of power speaks to one of Adventure Time's deeper messages, that mortality equalizes. Status, wealth, strength, and knowledge all lose their force when life ends. By giving Death a literal character who interacts casually with kings, heroes, and sorcerers alike, the show emphasizes that all are equal before him. His neutrality strips power dynamics of their illusions, revealing that beneath every struggle for dominance lies the same inevitable conclusion. Narratively, this dynamic ensures that the stakes in Adventure Time remain grounded. U can be filled with battles, politics, and cosmic chaos, but the knowledge of Death's authority keeps the story tethered to reality. Every rise and fall, every victory and defeat carries weight precisely because we know there is no permanent escape. Death waits for all, and that waiting shapes how characters live, whether they admit it or not. Ultimately, Death's role in U's power dynamics is that of the unshakable anchor. He does not need to interfere constantly because his influence is woven into the very fabric of existence. He checks the ambition of rulers, defines the limits of magic, resists the chaos of villains, and equalizes the fates of heroes. His power is not loud or flamboyant, but it is unmatched. In a world where everything changes, Death's authority remains the one constant. Among all the cosmic beings in Adventure Time, none feels more unsettling than Golb. Where Death represents order, finality, and structure, Golb embodies chaos, corruption, and the dissolution of meaning itself. To place them side by side is to see two radically different interpretations of endings, Death as conclusion and Golb as collapse. Their contrast defines some of the deepest themes in the show, because it reveals the difference between mortality as part of life's rhythm and annihilation as the undoing of life's very fabric. Death's authority is stabilizing. He exists to ensure that all stories reach their conclusion in an orderly way. When a life ends, it passes into his domain, a realm where endings are processed with calm detachment. This vision of mortality, though daunting, carries fairness. It gives shape to existence. Beginnings are meaningful because they will eventually end. Golb, by contrast, does not represent fairness or even inevitability. He is the embodiment of disorder, the unravelling of structure itself. Where Death is neutral, Golb is corrosive. He does not guide life into endings. He swallows meaning whole, leaving behind nothing but chaos. This contrast is most evident in how characters relate to each figure. When Finn and Jake meet Death, they can speak to him, negotiate with him, even challenge him to a contest. Death's impartiality allows for interaction. He listens, he judges, and he delivers outcomes consistent with his role. Golb, on the other hand, cannot be reasoned with. His presence is corruption incarnate, warping reality and dissolving identity. To face Death is to confront a boundary. To face Golb is to confront oblivion. Thematically, This distinction transforms Adventure Time's handling of mortality into something much richer. Death teaches that endings are necessary, but Golb shows what happens when endings are stripped of meaning. One is frightening but natural, the other terrifying because it breaks the natural order. When Simon and Betty encounter Golb in the series finale, the audience sees firsthand how destructive his power is. He does not simply kill, he consumes, distorts, and erases. Death's realm, by contrast, is stark but structured. A throne, a court, a judge. Golb's presence is formless, chaotic, incomprehensible. Psychologically, the comparison can be understood as two sides of human anxiety about mortality. Death embodies the fear of finality, the idea that our time is limited and that our lives must conclude. Golb embodies the deeper, more existential fear of meaninglessness. What if endings are not conclusions, but erasures? What if life does not matter at all because it dissolves into chaos? Adventure Time captures both fears by personifying them in two very different figures. By giving Death and Golb separate roles, the show acknowledges that humans are not only afraid of dying, but also afraid of the possibility that death itself has no order. In narrative terms, this duality also explains why Death is ultimately less of a villain than Golb. Death never tries to undo Oo or destroy its people. He exists as part of its natural system, a figure as necessary as the seasons or the comets. Golb, however, is positioned as the closest thing to a true apocalypse in Adventure Time. His influence threatens not only lives, but the coherence of existence itself. In that sense, Death can even be seen as a protector, because his impartiality preserves the integrity of endings, preventing them from slipping into chaos. The finale drives this point home. Betty's sacrifice, merging with Golb, demonstrates how devastating his power is compared to Death's. While Death can be bargained with, Golb consumes everything indiscriminately. Betty's choice to merge with him is not a confrontation with mortality, but with oblivion. It shows that in Adventure Time's cosmology, the true terror is not death, but the erasure of order. Against this backdrop, Death almost feels merciful. He is the reminder that endings exist within a framework that lives matter because they close in ways that make sense. Symbolically then, Death and Golb function as opposites. Death is the scythe that cuts when the crop is ready, while Golb is the rot that destroys the field entirely. Death ensures stories conclude. Golb erases the possibility of story altogether. This opposition elevates Death from a mere background figure into a cornerstone of Oo's balance. He is the line between existence and chaos, the force that ensures life has structure even in its end. Ultimately, the contrast between Death and Golb reveals why Adventure Time's exploration of mortality feels so unique. By showing us both the fairness of endings and the horror of dissolution, the series invites viewers to reflect on the difference between death as part of life and oblivion as the loss of life's meaning. Death is unsettling, but Golb is terrifying. And in that contrast, we learn why the character of Death is so vital. He represents not the enemy of life, but the guarantor of its shape. Few encounters in Adventure Time carry as much psychological weight as those with Death. While he is not a recurring villain, his presence lingers in the minds of the characters and the audience alike. Meeting Death is not just another strange adventure. It is an experience that shapes how characters see themselves, their limits, and the world around them. The psychological impact of standing before the one who governs all endings reveals why this figure matters so deeply to the story. For Finn, the encounter with Death is a direct challenge to his heroic identity. Finn has always seen himself as the boy who can save anyone fight anything, and make the world better through bravery and determination. Yet when he stands in the underworld, looking at the calm skeleton who oversees the end of every story, his usual tools no longer apply. A sword cannot cut through inevitability, and courage cannot undo the rules of the universe. This forces Finn into an unfamiliar position. He must confront the idea that some battles cannot be won. Psychologically, this is a profound shift. For a boy, defined by action, to face an opponent who cannot be defeated is to confront his own vulnerability. It plants the seeds of maturity, showing him that heroism has limits, and that acceptance can be as powerful as defiance. Jake's psychology is different, but no less affected. Where Finn resists, Jake shrugs. His laid-back attitude extends even into his encounters with death. He does not panic or rage at the reminder of mortality. Instead, he treats it as another part of the adventure. In many ways, Jake represents the healthiest psychological response to meeting death. He accepts the inevitability of endings and even finds humour in the situation. This acceptance is not indifference, but wisdom, the kind of perspective that comes from living a life full of joy and not clinging too tightly to permanence. Later, in Together Again, Jake's eventual death shows that this attitude remains with him to the very end. His acceptance becomes a model, demonstrating that peace with mortality is possible. For Peppermint Butler, the psychological impact is more complex. His dealings with death are marked not by fear or defiance, but by familiarity. This casualness reveals something about his personality. He is deeply comfortable with darkness, not because he denies its power, but because he has embraced it. Psychologically, this reflects a coping mechanism. By normalizing the underworld and treating death as a peer, Peppermint Butler lessens the fear that mortality usually inspires. His relationship with death shows that fear can be transformed into understanding through knowledge and ritual. For the audience, this carries its own unsettling lesson. 2. That even the most frightening truths can become manageable if one learns to face them regularly. Beyond individual characters, the psychological impact of death extends to the audience. Children watching Adventure Time may laugh at the absurdity of Finn and Jake challenging death to a music battle. Yet even in that laughter, something deeper takes root. The figure of death becomes less abstract and more approachable. Older viewers, meanwhile, may see reflections of their own anxieties. Death's calmness forces them to imagine mortality not as a dramatic horror, but as a fact that simply arrives. His humour and detachment mirror the ways humans often cope with death in real life, through jokes, through ritual, through acceptance. By giving form to mortality, the show provides viewers with a symbolic rehearsal for the experience of confronting it themselves. Another psychological effect of meeting death is the way it reframes priorities. For Finn and Jake, the encounter begins with the trivial goal of reviving a flower, yet by the time they leave, they have brushed against the boundaries of existence itself. This shift in scale mirrors how real encounters with mortality often cause people to re-evaluate what matters. Suddenly, small concerns feel unimportant, while questions of meaning and legacy rise to the surface. Adventure Time captures this dynamic perfectly. A silly mistake with a plant becomes the gateway to a confrontation with the ultimate truth. There is also the psychological tension between fear and comfort. Death is frightening because he cannot be defeated, yet his calm neutrality prevents him from becoming terrifying. Characters and viewers alike are left in a strange emotional space, unsettled but not horrified, anxious but also reassured. This tension is exactly what makes his roles so effective. It mirrors the paradox of mortality itself, the fear of endings balanced against the peace of knowing that endings are part of the natural order. In broader terms, meeting death in Oo functions as a rite of passage. Characters who encounter him come away changed. Finn begins to grasp that life cannot be conquered through action alone. Jake learns that acceptance is not resignation, but wisdom. Peppermint Butler embraces the knowledge that darkness can be befriended. Each character's psychological journey reflects a different human response to mortality, and together they create a spectrum of meaning. For the audience, these encounters provide not only entertainment but also reflection. Death becomes a teacher, showing us how our own attitudes toward mortality might shape the way we live. Ultimately, the psychological impact of meeting death lies in the way he turns mortality into something personal. Instead of being a vague concept, he is someone you can talk to, bargain with, or even laugh beside. This transformation makes mortality less distant, forcing both characters and viewers to imagine what it would feel like to stand in front of the end itself. And in that imagining, the fear softens, replaced by something more complex, a blend of awe, unease, and, surprisingly, comfort. To fully appreciate Adventure Time's version of death, it helps to step back and compare him to the countless depictions of death that have existed in mythology, folklore, and literature throughout human history. Death has always been personified, because giving it a face and a form makes the incomprehensible at least somewhat relatable. What makes Adventure Time's death so compelling is the way he borrows from these traditions, while reshaping them to fit the series' unique blend of absurdity, sincerity, and philosophical depth. In much of Western mythology, death is personified as the Grim Reaper, a hooded figure, skeletal, carrying a scythe to harvest souls. This image, which dates back to medieval Europe, embodies the fear of mortality during times of plague and war. The Reaper is a reminder that death spares no one, no matter their wealth or power. Adventure Time clearly borrows from this archetype. Death has the skeletal look, the scythe, and the aura of inevitability, yet the similarities end there. Unlike the traditional Reaper, who is often depicted as terrifying and merciless, Adventure Time's death is calm, detached, and sometimes even humorous. He does not hunt mortals down or revel in their fear. He simply waits, and when they arrive in his court, he treats them with neutrality. This departure is significant. By softening the frightening aspects of the Reaper archetype, the show transforms death from a monster into a fact of life. It mirrors a more modern perspective, the recognition that mortality, while daunting, is not inherently cruel. Adventure Time's death is less about punishment and more about balance. This reflects broader cultural shifts in how people talk about death, less as something to fear absolutely, and more as something to accept, even joke about, in order to cope with it. Other mythologies present different images of death, and Adventure Time seems to echo those as well. In Greek mythology, Thanatos was the personification of death, often portrayed as gentle, guiding souls rather than dragging them. Norse mythology offers Hel, who ruled over the realm of the dead with stern fairness, not unlike Adventure Time's underworld. In Hindu traditions, Yama serves as the god of death and justice, presiding as a judge over the fate of souls. Adventure Time's death fits comfortably in this lineage. He is not a villain, but an arbiter, closer to a judge than an executioner. His throne, his fairness, and his neutrality all reflect this ancient archetype of mortality as balance rather than horror. Where Adventure Time diverges most radically from mythology is in tone. Mythological depictions of death often lean into solemnity, terror, or grandeur. Death is presented as either fearsome or sacred. Adventure Time, however, wraps mortality in absurdity. A music battle with death, complete with bass guitars, would never appear in ancient myth. And yet, this absurdity does not diminish the character's significance. Instead, it brings the theme into the playful, surreal world of Oo, reminding the audience that even the heaviest truths can coexist with laughter. This tonal shift makes death accessible to children, while still resonating with adults, bridging generations in how they think about mortality. Psychologically, this blend of myth and humour reflects how people cope with death across cultures. Rituals, stories, and symbols exist to tame the fear of endings. Adventure Time adds its own ritual, the ritual of absurdity. By treating death with humour and casualness, the show models a way of approaching mortality without panic. It borrows the skeletal face of the Reaper to signal inevitability, but then disarms it with dry wit and weary detachment. The result is a character who is both archetypal and refreshingly original. Symbolically, comparing Adventure Time's death to mythological versions also highlights what the series wants to say about endings. In myth, death often represents judgment, punishment, or mystery. In Adventure Time, death represents structure. The underworld is not terrifying hellfire, but a quiet realm of rules. Death himself is not cruel, but procedural. This reframing aligns with the series' broader theme that cycles of beginning and end are necessary. By aligning death more closely with order than terror, Adventure Time makes mortality less alien and more integrated into the everyday chaos of Oo. Even his relationship with life echoes mythological patterns. Many cultures pair death with a counterpart, Thanatos with Hypnos, Hel with her father Loki's chaos, Yama with the cosmic cycle of reincarnation. Adventure Time continues this tradition by pairing death with the flamboyant, unpredictable figure of life. Together, they embody the eternal duality of beginnings and endings, showing that Oo is part of the same mythic rhythm that cultures around the world have always recognized. Ultimately, Adventure Time's death stands at a crossroads between myth and modernity. He borrows the skeleton, the scythe, and the throne from ancient images, but his dry humour and laid-back personality are distinctly new. This fusion allows him to feel familiar while also surprising, embodying the show's talent for taking old archetypes and spinning them into something strange and meaningful. In comparing him to myth, we see how Adventure Time honours the long tradition of personifying mortality while also reshaping it for a generation that needs to laugh, reflect, and accept all at once. One of the most surprising aspects of Adventure Time's portrayal of death is how much humour surrounds him. In most stories, the personification of mortality is treated with solemnity or terror, but in Oo, even the skeleton who governs all endings can be the source of a laugh. This balance of the serious and the absurd is at the heart of Adventure Time's philosophy, and nowhere is it clearer than in the way the show uses death not just as a figure of inevitability, but also as a character who contributes to comedy. The clearest example comes from Finn and Jake's first encounter with him. Their journey to the underworld begins with panic over a dead flower, but by the time they are standing in front of Death himself, the situation has become surreal. Instead of being dragged into torment or judged with thunderous finality, they end up challenging Death to a music battle. The sight of the Reaper-like figure plucking away at a bass guitar is both ridiculous and memorable, a joke that strips away the fear traditionally associated with mortality. It tells the audience immediately that Adventure Time is not going to treat death as a forbidden subject, but as something that can be laughed at while still being respected. This humour is not accidental, it serves a psychological purpose. Death is one of the most frightening concepts humans face, and humour has always been a way to cope with fear. By turning death into a character who can be part of a gag, Adventure Time allows its audience, children and adults alike, to approach mortality without flinching. Laughter creates distance from fear, softening the blow of inevitability. The fact that Finn and Jake can joke with death, argue with him, and even beat him at a game of music reassures the viewer that death, while real, does not have to be overwhelming. The show's use of humour also reflects Death's own personality. He does not resist the absurdity of the situation. He accepts it, even seems mildly amused by it. His willingness to play along suggests that he is not an enemy of joy. This makes him different from villains like the Lich, who inspire dread, or Golb, who dissolves meaning altogether. Death's sense of humour makes him more approachable, reminding us that endings can be met not only with sorrow, but with laughter. His humour feels dry, weary, the kind that comes from someone who has seen everything and no longer finds much shocking. That dryness is funny precisely because of how out of place it feels in the chaos of Ooh. Humour also shapes how characters like Jake process the experience. Jake's natural response to danger is often a joke, and his exchanges with death highlight how comedy can transform fear into acceptance. By laughing in the face of mortality, Jake models a psychological resilience that many viewers can recognize. For Finn, who is more serious, the humour creates a contrast. He struggles with the weight of mortality, while Jake shrugs it off with a quip. This dynamic mirrors real-life differences in how people cope with death. Some resist with solemnity, others deflect with humour. Adventure Time validates both, but it leans into humour as its primary storytelling tool. On a larger level, Death's humour underscores one of the show's most important themes, that the heaviest truths can be carried lightly. Adventure Time is filled with silly songs, nonsensical jokes, and surreal gags, but beneath the laughter lies a deep current of existential reflection. Death embodies this balance perfectly. He is the literal skeleton in the room, the unavoidable end of every story, and yet he also cracks jokes, plays bass, and delivers lines with dry wit. This paradox is what makes him memorable. He is both frightening and funny, both unsettling and comforting. The humour surrounding death also has symbolic value. It suggests that laughter itself is part of the cycle of life and death. Just as birth brings joy, endings can bring release. By treating death as something that can be laughed at, Adventure Time challenges the idea that mortality is only tragic. Instead, it proposes that endings can carry humour, that the absurdity of existence itself invites a smile even in the face of finality. In this way, death becomes not just a reminder of endings, but a reminder of the importance of laughter in living. Ultimately, the way Adventure Time uses humour around death ensures that he is never reduced to a cliché. He is not just the Reaper on a throne. He is a character who plays along, who shares in the absurdity of Ooh, and who embodies the idea that even mortality can be approached with a grin. His humour does not erase his authority, but it makes him accessible, and in doing so, it teaches both characters and viewers that death, like life, can be faced with courage, acceptance, and yes, a laugh. By the time Adventure Time reaches its finale, the stakes of the story are no longer confined to small quests or quirky conflicts. The arrival of Golb, the ultimate force of chaos, threatens to unravel everything. In this climactic battle, many of the show's deepest themes converge: love, sacrifice, change, and survival. Death himself does not step directly into the spotlight here, but his presence lingers all the same. His authority as the ruler of endings shapes how the finale is understood, even when he is not physically seen. The finale makes clear that is a world defined by cycles. Kingdoms rise and fall, friendships shift, and cosmic beings appear and disappear. Within these cycles, mortality is always at work. Death's earlier appearances prepare the audience to understand that nothing in can last forever, not even the most powerful relationships or the most stable kingdoms. As we watch characters face Golb's destruction, we remember Death's calm assurance that all things must end. The finale amplifies this truth by showing us endings on every scale, from the fates of individuals like Simon and Betty to the broader question of survival itself. One of the most powerful ways Death's influence is felt in the finale is through Jake. By this point in the series, Jake has lived a life full of adventure, love, and family. His eventual death is not shown in the finale proper, but in the epilogue of Together Again, where he embraces death with peace and acceptance. The seeds for that acceptance, however, were planted long before in his encounters with death. Because of that earlier exposure, Jake's final fate feels less tragic and more complete. His calm reunion with Finn in the afterlife is the culmination of the attitude he carried all along, that endings are not failures but part of the journey. Death's neutrality makes Jake's acceptance possible, because Jake trusts that his end is simply the natural order. Simon and Betty's story also reflects Death's legacy. Betty's sacrifice, merging with Golb to protect Simon, is not a confrontation with death, but with something worse: oblivion. Yet her action is framed within the logic of endings that death represents. By choosing to give up her own identity, Betty accepts a finality that mirrors the inevitability of death. Her story reminds us that not all endings come through death's court, but all endings carry the same weight of finality. The contrast with Golb makes death's role clearer than ever. Where Golb dissolves, death concludes. Betty's sacrifice resonates because we understand that her choice aligns with the structure that death embodies. Even the survival of after the battle with Golb bears the mark of death's influence. The show does not end with eternal victory or everlasting peace. Instead, it acknowledges that time will move forward, new characters will rise, and old ones will fade away. Shermie and Beth, the new adventurers introduced in the epilogue, stand as proof that life continues after endings. This continuation only has meaning because endings are real. Without the inevitability that death represents, Shermie and Beth's new adventures would not feel like a passing of the torch, but like an endless repetition. The fact that Adventure Time dares to end reinforces the importance of mortality as a theme. Psychologically, the finale also reflects how audiences have internalized death's earlier appearances. By the end of the series, viewers are not shocked by the idea that characters will change, age, or die. They have already seen Finn, Jake, Marceline, and others brush against mortality in different ways. Death's calm neutrality has trained the audience to accept endings with a mixture of sadness and peace. As a result, when the finale closes with an acknowledgement of both loss and continuation, it feels fitting rather than cruel. From a symbolic perspective, Death's absence from the finale is meaningful in itself. His work does not require his direct intervention. The fact that survives Golb's chaos at all is evidence that Death's order remains intact. Endings occur, Sacrifices are made, lives are lost, but meaning endures. Death's legacy is not about dramatic appearances, but about the quiet assurance that life has shape because it has limits. In this way, the finale affirms everything his earlier chapters in the series taught us. Endings are natural, necessary, and meaningful. Ultimately, Death's legacy in the finale lies not in a final act of judgment, but in the acceptance his presence has cultivated across the series. Jake's peace, Betty's sacrifice, and Oo's continuation all reflect the lessons he embodies. Adventure Time does not close by defeating Death or erasing him from the story. Instead, it ends with an acknowledgement of his importance, a recognition that every story, no matter how whimsical or surreal, must one day close. And in that closure lies the beauty of what came before. When all the encounters, comparisons, and story arcs are taken together, what emerges is a character who is far more than a one-off joke or a background figure. Death in Adventure Time is a symbol, one of the purest in the entire series. He represents not only the inevitable end of every life, but also the way endings give shape and meaning to existence. His calmness, his fairness, his humour, and even his weariness are all facets of a larger truth, that mortality, while unsettling, is not the enemy of life, but its partner. Adventure Time is a series that thrives on contrasts. It is silly, yet profound, absurd, yet deeply emotional, colourful, yet often melancholy. Death fits seamlessly into this fabric because he embodies one of the greatest contrasts of all, the fact that endings can be both frightening and comforting. On one hand, his skeletal design reminds us of the inevitability of decay. On the other, his dry humour makes him approachable, even endearing. By giving him this dual identity, the show tells us that death itself is a paradox, something we dread, yet something that defines why our time matters. Symbolically, death is the anchor that prevents Adventure Time's chaos from losing meaning. Oo is a world where kingdoms rise and fall, where cosmic beings bend the rules of reality, where the strangest creatures appear without warning. Without death, this chaos would stretch on endlessly, with no closure and no consequence. Death ensures that all things, no matter how strange, eventually conclude. This conclusion is not destruction, but definition. Endings give boundaries to beginnings, just as silence gives shape to music. His neutrality also carries symbolic weight. In many stories, death is painted as evil, a force to resist at all costs. Adventure Time refuses that simplification. By making death impartial, the series reframes mortality as something natural rather than malicious. He does not punish or reward. He does not chase heroes or torment villains. He simply sits in his throne, waiting for the inevitable. This neutrality symbolizes the universality of mortality. It comes for all without prejudice, and it equalizes kings and peasants, heroes and villains, candy people, and cosmic entities alike. His relationship with life further strengthens this symbolism. The two are not enemies locked in eternal combat, but counterparts who define each other. Life embodies beginnings, chaos, and vitality, while death represents conclusions, order, and finality. Together, they symbolize the cycle that makes existence possible. In presenting them this way, Adventure Time reflects the wisdom of countless cultures and mythologies, while keeping its own playful spin. The universe is not built on victory or defeat, but on balance. On a psychological level, death symbolizes the human process of grappling with mortality. Finn's defiance, Jake's acceptance, Peppermint Butler's familiarity These are all mirrors of how people respond to the idea of death in the real world. Some fight against it, some make peace with it, some learn to live alongside it. By giving death a voice and a personality, the show externalizes this inner struggle. The underworld becomes the stage for confronting fears that usually remain hidden. Symbolically, death is not only the ruler of endings, but also the teacher of how to live with their inevitability. Humour is another crucial part of his symbolism. Death's dry jokes and his willingness to play a bass guitar in a music battle show that even mortality can be approached with laughter. This is not a dismissal of seriousness, but an acknowledgement that humour is one of humanity's greatest tools for coping with fear. Symbolically, his humour represents resilience, the ability to face the end without collapsing under its weight. By laughing with death, Finn and Jake model a way of living that embraces endings rather than fleeing from them. Death's absence from the finale also has symbolic meaning. By not appearing at the climax, the show communicates that he does not need to interfere directly. His influence is already embedded in the fabric of the world. When Betty sacrifices herself, when Simon is freed, when Shermie and Beth take up the mantle of new adventurers, death's presence is felt in the structure of those endings. He symbolizes the fact that the universe continues to turn not because someone wins or loses, but because cycles close and new ones begin. Ultimately, the symbolic meaning of death in Adventure Time is one of acceptance. He represents the truth that endings are not failures, but essential parts of life. By personifying mortality in such a calm, humorous, and impartial way, the show reframes death as something that can be faced without despair. Death symbolizes balance, equality, and the rhythm of existence itself. He is the figure who reminds us that stories only matter because they end, and that life only has meaning because it is finite. In the world of Ooh, filled with chaos, magic, and endless adventure, death stands quietly at the centre, ensuring that everything has a shape. And in the world beyond Ooh, in the hearts of the viewers who laughed, cried, and grew up with the series, he symbolises the courage to face mortality, not with fear, but with a strange mixture of respect, curiosity, and even a smile.